Afternoon all. Okay, let's continue our look at the Kasparov-Short Blitz match. So it's 5-minute games with 2-second increments, I believe. So knight f3 from Kasparov. Ratty start. But now we're going to go into the English opening, c4. Black, after e6, now plays b6. So going to fianchetto that bishop, put pressure on some central squares. And white also fianchettos now g3. So we have two opposing bishops now after bishop g2. Now sometimes, black has to be careful with these opposing bishops, for some tricks like knight g5 exposing an attack on the bishop. So okay, black needs to tread with care. Here white hasn't committed the pawn to d4, and black, Nigel Short, seizes the opportunity to try and get control of the d4 square. He plays actually c5. Okay, Kasparov castles, and now we have knight f6. Okay, trying to just develop and then castle kingside. Knight c3. Nothing special so far. After bishop e7. Now a liberating move by Garry Kasparov. He just plays d4. Okay, now there's a slight issue after c takes d4, that if he did play knight takes d4, he might be concerned with this fianchetto, the exchange, because really white might be left with some weaknesses on the light squares, and black might be able to play queen c8 for example, and then queen b7, and it would be nice on the diagonal potentially, trying to exploit those weakened light squares around the king. So actually Kasparov's decision to play queen takes d4 is interesting, but it does mean a tempo game from black is now available in the form of knight c6. So where does the queen want to go? On h4 it doesn't seem like an ideal parking spot. There might even be a useful like knight d5 here, and then knight takes c3, fracturing potentially white's pawns. So actually Kasparov chooses queen f4, which, as these arrows highlight, might be a focal point for d6 later. If white gets in rook d1 and then later b3 and bishop a3, d6 might be a sort of target in black's position, a soft target, sitting on that semi-open d file. White's soft target would be this c4 pawn sitting on the semi-open c file. Okay, after castles, rook d1. So not yet trying to do anything with these two, just putting a little bit more pressure on the d file. Maybe trying to keep d5 to be discouraged actually with the immediate rook d1. And now queen b8, trying to relieve some of the tension and pressure just with a queen exchange. And Kasparov welcomes the queen exchange. He's not moving his queen anywhere. h4 isn't that attractive anyway, so he just plays e4. So with e4 he's got a kind of Maroczy bind on that d5 advance, which black might have wanted to use. So now this d pawn is sitting as a target on the semi-open c file, with white having the Maroczy bind structure, and queen takes f4 might just automatically develop white's pieces and still keep an eye on d6. So actually Nigel decides here to play d6, not bothering about the queen exchange, keeping the queens on. So we have slightly passive looking hedgehog type position if we look at black's pieces, all just on the third row, very compact on the third row, 1, 2, 3, whilst white is occupying more territory, taking the first 4 rows if you look at this position. But black, sometimes is very solid. This is a 2-pawn island, and okay, there's a potential 3 to 2 over here, and black's got an extra pawn in the centre, you'll observe. Okay, but neither side has the advantage of, say, an extra bishop. Neither side has major exploitable weaknesses, and in fact these two weaknesses sort of compensate for each other a little bit, usually the semi-open c-file soft targets. So b3, aiming for d6 potentially, but after now the move a6. a6 does a couple of things, as well as the standard freeing manoeuvre b5. Also queen a7 technically is a move, but also technically is the interesting knight a7 to support b5. So those that want to play the hedgehog positions might like this idea of knight a7 and b5, which I think crops up in this game. The other interesting thing here though is, why doesn't white play bishop a3? You might be thinking, well, isn't d6 now a gaping soft target? Garry Kasparov, he plays bishop b2. Let's just engine check. Why wouldn't bishop a3 be a nice move to play here, given what was said? In fact, bishop a3 is given by the engine here as just about equal 0.04. I don't know if you should be able to see that. This engine analysis here. So let's say rook d8, rook ac1. It's about equal. Now black here can even apparently try b5. Takes, and a3 might be a target. So this might be the reason that bishop a3 technically might be an issue for black playing b5. So in this position, I think knight takes b5 is going to be a disaster now. Let's see, e5, the queen gets chased back. Rook a5, we get loose pieces here. So tactically, it's very important to keep hold of what's going on tactically in the position. White doesn't want to end up with loose pieces. If he has to take here now, attacking the queen, this is starting to look very dangerous for the dynamics of the black pieces, this kind of variation, where black's kind of winning a piece for some pawns. So maybe that's why Garry didn't play bishop to do with b5, because the rook's still on the a file. If the rook was on the c file, maybe there'd be more justification for the natural bishop a3. Okay, so bishop b2. So keeping the pieces kind of secure without tactical targets. And where is he going to put his rooks though? That's the question. After rook d8, he plays queen e3, which actually attacks that b pawn. It really is threatening to win the b pawn. So that has to be defended. Nigel plays queen a7, defending it. And now actually the decision here is made to play bishop a3 now. So I wonder, actually, it looks as though the key problem is the exchange and then taking on b5 and taking on b5. That would be attacking a rook if rook takes a7. So there's a big difference here about b5, I think. So instead, Nigel, he doesn't play b5, he plays bishop f8. So the bishop's more secure, protected, also against ideas like e5, which might be disrupting. So a bit of prophylaxis maybe as well. h3. And funny enough, despite what was said earlier now about b5, b5 is played here. Okay. So, which prompts me actually to check. Let's just rewind then. Why wasn't it played earlier? What was the subtle difference about the bishop being here and not playing b5 here? So bishop f8 was played here. If we add a Qbitsa here, why wasn't b5 here possible? Takes. Alright, so say definitely it's here. And you can see from these variations this exchange sacrifice might not be great compensation. White should be better here in this position. The exchange up. Takes a7. Then actually, okay, supporting b5, but actually here, and now we see the loose bishop that we were talking about earlier being exploited. So d takes possible without losing the bishop. So say knight e8, takes, knight takes, bishop c5 here. So that threatens nasty bishop b6, moving the rook, and then c5, exploiting the pin on the d file potentially. So say knight ac8, taking away b6, cb, knight takes, rook takes, bishop takes. White ends up with a nagging pressure position, I believe. Slightly advantageous to Houdini here. Not much. So b5 was almost like possible then. So it's played now. Okay, so the bishop is secure against e5 ideas. So in a way we could then change what we've just said. We could say it's sort of preparation for b5 here. So after h3, b5 is indeed played. And it's the usual kind of classic thing to target this poor c4 pawn. The bishop's on, fianchettoed here, is not supporting c4. c4 is on the semi-open c file. It ticks all the boxes for being an exploitable weakness. You know, without easy defensive resources automatically available, and being on the same C file, the tick boxes are there for that pawn being targeted. Not only that, there's counterplay behind it on the A file, as we've seen in these variations. So white takes on A7 now, knight takes, and now, even though the bishop's on F8, we get a kind of breakthrough now with E5. So what's the idea of this? Is white really content to be left with a potentially terribly weak C4 pawn, and maybe even exchanging off these guys? Well, this is what happens after take on E5, take on F8. The dark squares have been a bit weakened, and now the light squares have been a bit weakened. So with the absence now of the bishops, what has happened here? White's now threatening C5, getting a big pass pawn, and then maybe B4, and then maybe even A4 with pressure. So Nigel wants to make sure this isn't a strongly supported pawn, just isolate it. So he isolates it with BC, and now he's got an issue here that the rook can't really easily defend there. Rook takes D8 and Rook B1 would be threatening the invasive Rook B7. This seems very dangerous for black all of a sudden. The B file, and this slightly superior knight tying down this knight, and of course knight D7 is not possible. So King E8 actually makes knight D7 possible. I think that's one of the main reasons perhaps of King E8. But now this B file infiltration, Rook AB1, what's to stop now Rook B7s, which would make use of the knight actually eyeing F7. Rook takes D1, and now Kasparov is keen to keep his threat of Rook B7. Rook on the 7th, Nimzovich. Knight takes D1 is chosen. If we did choose Rook D1, here's a variation I looked at earlier. This would be okay anyway. Engine actually, by brute force approach, actually decides Rook takes D1 is stronger actually because of this. This is the evidence. The Rook comes to D6, hitting A6 laterally, and if A5 there, Rook A6. There's another variation here. If Knight C8, keeping the Rook out of D6, then Knight A4. Now Knight C5, and what's happening here is the A6 pawn is dropping off, and if the A6 pawn doesn't drop off, say Knight B6, now Knight C6, and we start to see the true power of this Rook D1 idea. So this is with the benefit of brute force, the all-seeing engine doesn't go with the intuitive idea of infiltrating via B7, but actually wants to capture the Rook with the Rook, not the Knight. But the human move would seem to be the logical follow-up, just to try and get Rook B7 in. So actually Knight E4 is played here. The other technical reason now is that there's an ingenious maneuver which maybe Nigel didn't see if he wants to parry White's infiltration, namely Knight C8, and here Rook A7, very, very nifty indeed. A bit like the tail game maneuver which I should have played last night. Rook A7 comes to the rescue here on the 7th rank, with that awkward looking Knight C8 being the hero here, now that F7 is defended. So in this position, this certainly is more compelling evidence from the engine point of view why Rook takes D1 was a bit superior to Knight takes D1. Okay, so Rook takes D1, Knight takes D1. But Nigel plays maybe then a blunder in retrospect, Knight E4, allowing this easy infiltration on the 7th. So he's being targeted, his poor pawns are being targeted. Rook C7. Okay, the Knight was ingenious though in defending F7 for the moment, but there's some issues here. What to do about these poor pieces? Knight A C8 and now C5. This pawn is also taking away the knight from the protection of F7, and now it's snapped up here because now G7 and H7 are under fire potentially. But here Nigel uses that cunning rook maneuver. Finally he spotted it here. Rook A7. Well, this is the idea of Knight C8. So no more carnage on the 7th rank. White keeps some pressure going with Rook F4. Doesn't want the exchange of rooks. Maybe more pressure. but taking a knight d3 might be a small advantage as well. Knight f6, now knight e3. So we've got here an extra pawn. Okay, but how to get it to queen? We're going to see a masterclass. The rook gets behind it. e5 is now reinforced by the other knight now with this, so the knights are supporting each other. And now the lifting of the blockade. So one blockade was lifted, but now c7 is the next blockade point. How is that lifted? Okay, the king plays curiously to f2 now, getting out of tactical trouble perhaps in some variations. h4, putting the squeeze on the king side. So taking it easy for a moment. The passed pawn is protected by the advanced knight. This rook's tied down. Black's pieces are not going anywhere. Let's celebrate that. They're not going anywhere. Let's see if we can do small improvements to the position. So the king goes back now. Check. The king now goes thrusting forward. g6 and now g4. So it starts to be clear actually. f5 is a menacing break now to undermine d5. You know, we've got a winning apiece, nearly. But the danger level's going up. You know, h5 maybe takes, then f5, same idea. The danger level's going up here. King c7 and now rook d2. Where is the rook heading? It can now potentially go to h2, so maybe h5 and use the h file. So black's been really tortured here. a4 and now f5, undermining black's best piece, d5. Check. And now Nigel takes on f5. Takes. White's created an inroad into the position via the d file now. He takes on g6. Rook b2, there's also an inroad on the b file. And now that's ignored. Nigel's not content to play rook a7. He plays check now. And now knight b6 to try and block the b file. But now the rook switches to the f file. Maybe he was actually cracking here, and rook a7 would have been inadequate here. Let's check this out. Rook a7, add a blitzer here. Apparently check. The king's been drawn away with a pawn sack. King and pawn. King's very, very far away, and this h pawn is this here. So maybe Nigel let the rook come in sufficiently. And Kasparov has masterfully cleared up the f file with his pawn advances. So he's got that f file which he now uses. Okay, close that off. Bigger board. So a3, it's cracking now. The position's cracked. The pass pawn, the final blockades on the pass pawn are being lifted. The king's not usually a good blockader, and that is soon to be lifted now after check. c7 check. Very nice tactic here. So if king takes c7, knight d5, discovering a check and winning the rook. King e8, rook h7. In final preparation now, there's a big threat now of c8 supported by the knight. That's protected, but now knight d5. Okay, so what's going on here? I think knight takes d5 might be answered just simply by king takes d5. In the game, rook c5 was played. Let's have a quick look at knight takes d5. I think just king takes might be enough. King takes, but also apparently check here. So taking now. You see, the problem is here, white's threatening just to get this king too far away from this h-pawn, so this is winning as well. You can just give up that c-pawn to drag the king away and winning h-pawn. So that pillar here in nations, even if the c-pawn doesn't succeed, it acts as a major decoy for the h-pawn to be decisive. So anyway, in the game, rook c5 was played, and after check we have rook d8 check. Just winning a whole knight, because if the king moves, pardon me, to c8, then c8 check, and it's all over. Okay, so that was a kind of positional masterclass from Kasparov in how to play these English openings, how to gain a nagging advantage. I'm not minding about the c4 weakness, the timing of bishop a3s, making sure that when the two bishops come off the board, that white still has a small nagging advantage. So both bishops going off the board, white's got the trumps of b file, dangerous c pawn, which also acts as a liability as well as a strength. Maybe, you know, technically rook takes d1 according to the engines is stronger here, despite the seemingly beautiful power of the intuitive idea of getting the rook to the 7th, because of this idea apparently of knight c8 and rook a7 here. But that wasn't used. So Nigel, instead, he's using another maneuver, but this is only temporary because the defender can be undermined. The defender of f7 can be undermined, unfortunately, with c5 with this idea. And this is what happens after rook c7. There's no rook c8 without losing a7, and now c5 is on the cards. A move like f6, you might wonder. f6 is starting to leave these other pawns vulnerable. Maybe the knight just retreats, and how do you defend the other pawns? It starts to look a bit nasty. So knight ac8, c5, and it's starting to fall a bit. The whole a major pawn's lost. But now, we get this other lesson how to use, pass c4, and this is all in a 5-minute game. This is 5-minute chess with 2-second increments. So Kasparov has still got it going. He's a brilliant champion of the game, and I love these exhibition matches he's doing recently. So he's getting rid of the pawns that keeping potentially strong winning outside h pawn though. But now he's got f-file access. So once he gets that f-file access, now it's really all over. He's got enough winning advantage here, even without having to win a piece. Comments or questions on YouTube? I hope you got something from that. And if you're not already subscribed to the King's Crush channel, please do. It's free and you'll be notified of any new videos. Thanks very much.